This episode is brought to you by Tic Tac. Summer tastes like Tic Tac. Tantalize your taste buds this sunny season with citrus adventure and orange. 2 everyday flavors that bring summer in every. Tic Tac Citrus Adventure is a yummy, vibrant medley of lemon, lime, and mandarin. And Tic Tac Orange is the perfect mix of tangy and sweet. Visit us at Tic Tac USA on social to refresh your summer with Tic Tac.
Welcome to One Tough Podcast. Well, today I have 2 really interesting guys that I know for a long time. I got my friend Ira Rosen, the man of 60 Minutes, with the Ticking Clock book. That is a phenomenal book, and I tell everyone, buy it. He brings you into the world of 60 Minutes that I watch, even though I don't like some of the stuff they do. I watch it every Sunday at 7 o'clock. I make sure I do. And my other friend, Peter Schweizer. Now, Peter and I, we know each other from afar, from Fox News. I was a contributor for 12 years, and I was very impressed with a lot of your stories. And I call you 2 guys, I'm a detective. You guys are detectives too. You could call yourself investigative reporters, whatever you want to use it. But I say you're a detective because you detect the truth and you go in there and you find out what it's all about. And some of the books, Peter, that you've been involved in, Architects of the Ruin, and what was that about? Give me a little short blurb on it.
That was on the 2008 financial collapse and who was responsible for it, which was largely Wall Street and some regulators in Washington.
Well, how about Andrew Cuomo? No?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
He's in the book as HUD secretary and, the notion that we're going to give bank loans to anybody who basically wants them. That generated from Washington. And of course, Wall Street was there to capitalize on it.
And that book is still available for people to learn
Absolutely, on Amazon and elsewhere.
And then the Secret Empires, what was that about?
That was about how politicians from both political parties are offshoring their corruption. They don't take the payments themselves. They direct the payments to family members and other people that don't have to report it. And that's where we originally broke the story on Hunter Biden's foreign dealings in China and elsewhere.
Well, I had some involvement personally at Rudy Giuliani's apartment looking at the actual laptop. And it was quite eye-opening, to say the least. And then the other book was Throw 'Em All Out. And that book you worked in conjunction with my friend Ira?
Yes, I wrote a book called Throw Them All Out. That's around the time when I met Ira, and we ended up doing a 60-minute segment that really broke wide open the story of insider trading on the stock market by politicians. It's illegal for us to engage in insider trading, but until this story came out and forced Congress to act, it was quite acceptable for them to do it. And, it's funny, Bo, when I did the research on that and I shared it with Ira, one of the things that we all laughed about was there was this academic study that said, the average person underperforms the stock market with their stock picks. The average hedge fund beats the market by 5%, and the average U.S. senator beat the market by 12%.
Wow.
And, the question there is, Bo, are they that much smarter than everybody else, or is there something else going on? And I think we figured out what was going on.
You know what, Peter and Ira, I'll be very honest with me personally. I ran for United States Congress. I lost by 2,500 votes in the area. It was 7-1 Democrat, 86. And I ran for mayor, and they threw me off all the lines. I couldn't be a Republican. I couldn't be a Democrat. But what really kind of pisses Bo Dietl off is the fact that all these people go into the Congress and go into the United States Senate, and they go in there with a salary of a couple $100,000, and they go in there with nothing. They own mortgages on the house, and then after 5-10 years, they have this value. I mean, just look at our former president of the United States. Every one of them. This is not a political version of what I'm talking about. Republicans and Democrats, the same as the like. And then they become worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And something is wrong with that picture. And I'm sure I'd love you to bring us into that world, Ira and Peter, about where these people, how do they set this up? I know there's about, 3,000 lobbyists in Washington? About 3,000 lobbyists?
Well, let me tell you one of the things that sort of when I was investigating Congress, I had one congressman come to me and he gave me a card and he said, this is how much money I have to raise in order to be on this committee, even though I have the seniority. And this is the amount of money I have if I want to be chairman.
Wow.
It was literally, these guys were like gangsters who had to kick up to the top. And what they do is called dialing for dollars. And they end up going to the Republican club or the Democratic club, and they have to do this almost on a daily basis. And there are phone banks set up, and they're calling and calling and calling. Now, people are not giving these people money because they like them or they're good looking. They're giving them money because they want something from them.
Access.
And they can't advance in Congress unless they raise that money. I knew this one guy who unfortunately passed away, Walter Jones, a Republican from North Carolina, who refused to partake in the system. He was in Congress for more than 20 years. He couldn't even get a committee assignment because he refused to play the game.
Wow. Now, like I said, I dabbled in politics. I hate it. I hate politics. All they are is a bunch of lying bastards. And I raised a lot of money for a lot of politicians, but I know one thing. It's all about raising. Then you have to kick up to whether it be the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee. Part of your money is that you're raising. That doesn't all go to you. You have to kick it up to the National Party. And if you're in a congressional, it's a National Congressional Committee and the Senate Committee. So there's so many levels of kicking up cash to those areas. And then whoever's in charge, if you're a higher up in there and you're on a committee or a committee head, if you don't kick up enough money, you ain't getting appointed to anything, is what you're saying.
Well, the best committee assignments are where they could raise the most money. So let's take someone like Senator Schumer.
Yeah.
Now, Schumer, who, was from New York, you would think he's, Mr. Liberal, he'd want to advance housing and all this stuff. He's on the Senate Banking Committee. And why is that? Because that's where the money's at. The banks have the money, and he's able to go there, and he collects the money, and he's able to meet his quota number in order to be, the boss.
Yeah, and one of my dear departed friends, and I'm sure you guys know who he was, dear departed Mel Weiss. Mel Weiss was one of the leading Democratic fundraisers who happened to be to the left of Edward Kennedy politically, and we became loving friends. And one thing I said to Mel, let's not talk about politics, please, because I don't like your Hillary Clinton. And as far as what Hillary Clinton and her husband's all about, I don't like them. So let's keep that out of it. We'll play golf and we don't talk politics, but that's another whole side of it. And I would really love, Peter and Ira, today to get into some meat. Let's name some names and let's target this show that these are people that are making money that are questionable under the auspices of being a congressperson or a senator. Simple.
Peter, it all began in many ways on the insider trading story that you and I did in 2012, but it continued recently. And, you know the story of Senator Burr, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there are numerous examples, and of course, we'll give examples from both political parties, but it's really important to emphasize this is not a Republican problem, a Democrat problem, it's a human problem. And the problem is that if you're an elected official in the United States today, you have access to enormous amounts of information, and you can get very creative in the manner in which you can actually increase your personal wealth. So part of that is insider trading, and you have Senator Burr from North Carolina, who clearly was getting briefings on where the pandemic was going in the early weeks and months of the pandemic, and was able to engage in serious stock trades. He sold a lot of stock. It was totally out of proportion with the kind of transactions he had done before, and he avoided losses of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So one of the ways you can do it is by doing the stock trading. Another one, and this is something that Ira covered in the 60 Minutes story we did together, is you can get access to IPO shares of stock, initial public offering. I call them invest in politicians because that's really what you're doing. So let's say, Bo, for example, you're a senator from the state of New York. If I give you a shoebox with $100,000 of cash in it, and we get caught, that's bribery, and both of us are going to go to jail. But if you're a senator from New York and I want a favor, I can give you access to pre-public shares of stock. And a lot of times with these IPOs, you can buy shares at $11 a share, and within the day they're trading at $100. One of the people we profiled in that book was in the story was Nancy Pelosi, who I think at that time had obtained at least 8 to 10 IPO shares of stock, which generated huge amounts of money. There are Republicans that have done this too.
Wow.
And they have to now disclose if they're getting IPO shares of stock, but they can still do it. And that's a way for them to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, Bo, in a single day.
Now we have,
Well, when we did the story, we focused on Pelosi's. She and her husband got an IPO with a credit card company. At the same time, there's major credit card legislation that was kind of hanging out in Congress. And they didn't know if it's going forward or not going forward. She gets this IPO, and she and her husband made, I think, over $100,000 in 4 days after it went public. Now,
but I mean, yeah.
That was at the time legal. And guess what happened? So we do the story, right? And we get a big pat on the back. We get a lot of sponsors in Congress. It passes the Senate. Barack Obama mentions it in the State of the Union. I get invited to the White House signing. I got a front row seat. Boy, oh boy, this is what reporting's all about. You know what happened? A couple months later, by voice vote, they rescinded the whole thing, and it's back to business as usual.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables. Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft, pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
So in other words, there are what they call ethic committees in Congress and Senate, is there not? Are they just powerless? So where are the ethic committees on this? Why isn't someone like Pelosi held in to stand up and answer for what she did?
Well, part of it, Bo, unfortunately, if you sit on the ethics committee, let's say, and in this particular case,
you'll get money too.
Are you really, if you're sitting on the ethics committee and you're a Democrat in the Pelosi case, are you really going to go aggressively at the Speaker of the House that you need to pass your legislation? And same thing for Republicans, no. So the big problem is Congress is basically telling us we will police ourselves. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. Well, I'm sorry. Are we going to tell Wall Street to police themselves? Are we going to tell, any corporation in America? No, you need to have an outside arbitrator that cannot be influenced by the powers that be in swapping favors and trades. And that just does not happen in Congress.
Just imagine to take Pelosi's whole career and look at all her trades and all her husband's trades that she was able to get inside information. I mean, you would definitely have a real criminal complaint. I was involved once with a guy named Jordan Belfort. Dick Grasso called me in, and he said they got this little guy down in Long Island, and he's got a place called Stratton Oakmont, and the wise guys want to go moving in on them. What they used to do is they used to take a stock, do an IPO on a Monday, and it was $2 a share, and then he had about 12 of these golfers, I call them, and they would go and they'd buy the stock in cash, like for $200,000 worth of $2 stock, and by Friday, they'd be having a party at Millie's in Great Neck, and they would sell everything out at $12, and Grandma and Grandpa were caught holding the bag, and it just went away. And I mean, it kind of sounds like it's kind of similar into the United States Congress, the way they're doing it. And the most important thing is now with the advent of all this greening stuff, there's a lot of companies in solar. Look at the one that comes to life. How much money was made on that one in upstate New York, that $600 million with that solar company? Remember years ago when the president at that time was that Solandria? What was the name of that, Peter?
I think you're talking about Solyndra. Yeah, and I mean, that's another aspect of this. And again, it happens in both administrations. But, one of the reasons I'm kind of like skeptical of government is the more power government gets, the more ability they have to pick winners and losers. And so the federal government gives out huge amounts of money in terms of grants and government-backed loans. And guess what? That tends to flow to the political supporters and financiers that put the politician in office. And that's our taxpayer money. So, it's a problem. I think that one of the biggest things that I've come to realize in all of this, and I don't know if Ira or Bo, you have the same impression, is a lot of people think Washington, D.C. is kind of like Jimmy Stewart. Mr. Smith goes to Washington, He goes there he's kind of a good guy and all these outside forces are trying to corrupt him. That happens in some cases. A lot of times, honestly, it's not Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's The Sopranos or it's The Godfather. People go into politics and they have to create a demand for their services to raise money, to get lobbying contracts for family members. So it's more extortive. They use these mafia techniques where they'll threaten, oh, well, we're going to introduce this legislation, or, you better support me and my guys, or these guys are going to do that to you. It's an extortion racket. And they use the cudgel and power of government to fundraise.
One of my favorite stories that I did a story about Jack Abramoff, who was a lobbyist.
I remember him.
Members of Congress. Now, his scam was this. He would go to the Indians, and there would be a congressman who would put in restrictive legislation on Indian casinos, and they would put this rider on a bill, and the Indian casinos would go crazy. They'd hire Abramoff to get rid of this thing. Meanwhile, they didn't understand that Abramoff and the congressman were in cahoots. And so he calls up the congressman. They work out a number. So the Indians contribute to the congressman. They give a big payoff to Abramoff, and they remove the thing that shouldn't have been in there in the first place. So the congressman made a lot of money. Abramoff made a lot of money, and the Indians were extremely happy because they got rid of something that shouldn't have been in there in the first place. That is typical gangster techniques, but it's practiced in the U.S. Congress.
Yeah,
and it's legal.
Yeah, and you know what it makes me feel like, guys? Ira, Peter, makes me feel like, you know what? Maybe I want to move to Russia. Putin doesn't look too bad. At least he has the iron fist and he controls these little punks in the legislature. Because when I hear more and more, now they're giving away with their infrastructure bill. They're just throwing this money out there. They have no safeguards. I know from my investigative stuff with Cohen Resnick. It's a firm that investigates how money's being spent. How money's being spent. And up to 30% of any one of these contracts, just look at LaGuardia Airport. They're still under construction over there. 30% minimum is a misappropriation, stealing. There's no safeguards with what we're doing right now with the infrastructure. I am for the infrastructure. God knows our bridges. We got a bridge from 1888, the Brooklyn Bridge. I can't believe cars and trains are still driving over it. We've got to support our infrastructure, but the money has to be spent, and somebody has to watch it being spent. Otherwise, there's hundreds of billions of dollars wasted. And I know on the other side of that coin, these companies that are getting these contracts, there's a filtering of money going to these congressional people that are voting for it, right?
Yeah, and look, just real briefly, in the Biden administration, and a Republican would have done the same thing. Who did they put in charge of doling out the money from the infrastructure bill, which I thought was a good idea too? Mitch Landrieu, the former mayor of New Orleans. And I get it. He's a mayor, but New Orleans is a highly corrupt city. He's a politician. The notion or the idea that the person in charge of determining infrastructure should actually be somebody who understands and knows infrastructure and is in the business. So the money is going to get doled out in a political way. It is. And again, it doesn't matter which administration. It's part of the problem. There's so much upside to corruption and so little downside that they engage in it, and they're going to keep doing it, and the numbers just keep getting bigger.
It's not very sexy to put in an infrastructure bill a mechanism to see how the money is being spent. They rather give that money to some road project or something like that. If a congressman would say, I think we should have $100 million for enforcement to make sure that the money is they say, what are you, crazy? Maybe for auditors? What congressman is going to propose legislation for that's not going to get that person reelected, but building a road in their neighborhood and giving some money to maybe some friends, that'll do the trick.
Or some nonprofits that are all standing out there with their hands out. Like even with New York City, when you have $100 billion budgets, quite high, and we had a Mayor de Blasio there, whose wife was in control of a $1.1 billion of Operation Thrive for the mentally ill. And when asked what you do with the money, I'll get back to you. There was no explanation with it. And there's all these nonprofits were getting money out of them. And I'll guarantee you, you put me on this thing, there was a back door with those nonprofits that that there's a slush fund there, follow the money, and we'll follow it. Like I say, even with de Blasio, when those two fellas in Brooklyn, two Jewish fellas, got locked up for bribery, remember, and were convicted. The constitute of bribery, and I'm not an attorney, means you have a briber and you have a bribe receiver. Well, you're locked up and convicted the bribers. What about the bribe receiver, Bill de Blasio? Why wasn't he prosecuted? This is part of the game again with the political game. Money's being passed back and forth. But to stay focused on what you guys are here about, I just want to hear more and more names about actuality of these bills that are floating around and which guys are making money. We talked about Pelosi. How much is she worth?
The estimate.
Go ahead, Peter.
No, I was going to say the estimate I've seen is 100 million to 150 million.
And that's not counting her husband.
That includes her husband.
Oh.
Yes, when she first was elected in, I think it was 1989, it was a special election. Their net worth was, I think, around 10 million, and it's now 100 to 125 million. And there's all kinds of questions about legislation. There are members of Congress from the other side, Mitch McConnell. And his wife, Elaine Chao. It's a little bit different because his in-laws have this shipping company that's done very, very well with the Chinese government. Yeah. He got a $25 million gift from his in-laws. So it's a major problem. And look, and maybe Ira can talk about this at greater length. I think one of the things that's been introduced, one of the pieces of legislation that's been introduced that I like, I don't think it's going to pass, Elizabeth Warren has proposed banning members of Congress from trading individual stocks. You can buy mutual funds, whatever. You cannot buy individual shares of stock. Nancy Pelosi and others are opposed to that, and we know why they're opposed to it. There's too much money to be made.
Wow.
The other thing, Bo, is the dodge that a lot of them say is, I have a blind trust, and a blind trust is basically is I give it to you, I never talk to you, I don't steer anything. Well, when we did our story in 2012, John Boehner, for example, his defense was, I don't have anything to do with it. But it turns out the person who he was involved in, he was talking to on a regular basis. So he could pass on information one way or the other, if he so choose, to steer some of the stock trades. So I don't think that's going to get anywhere because they're going to say we want to participate in the American dream and participate in the stock purchases. So I don't think that's going to go very far, that piece of legislation. But one story that Peter and I worked on, which we were just talking about before we got on, was something called leadership hacks. And Peter, why don't you pick up on that, and I'll add to what we ended up finding on 60.
Sure. Leadership PACs. I mean, the way to think about politicians is they have lots of pockets you can put money into. So obviously you can hire one of their family members. You have a campaign committee, and then they have political action committees. But they also have these things called leadership PACs, Bo. And what's great about leadership PACs is while a regular campaign committee has pretty severe restrictions on what you can spend money on. You can't, buy yourself a new suit. You can't get a haircut. With those campaign months. Those rules don't apply to leadership PACs. So we looked at what they were doing, and Ira 60 did a story on it, and it was quite shocking what we found.
So one of the people that we focused on was a congressman from New Jersey named Andrews, who used his leadership PAC money to go golfing in Scotland. Wouldn't you like to do that, right? Another congresswoman from, I believe it was Arizona, loaned money from her leadership PAC to herself at an interest rate of 20 or 22%, which is more than the mafia charges for money on the streets. And a third congressman we focused on used his leadership PAC money to hire his two daughters who didn't have much political experience, and he hired them at a very, very decent salary to work in his office. His defense was, who do I trust more than members of my own family?
Yeah. And just not to go off again, but I have two guys here that have all the intelligence and the juice that you guys can answer some questions with me. I always was thinking about the Clinton Foundation. I think, Peter, didn't you do something with the Clinton Foundation? What was that the guy named Brand? What was his name? Brand? What was that company? The guy's name, Brand, something with the company that if you wanted to do business with the Secretary of State, you had to do business. What was that company? And that company was doing so well. And then when she lost the election, it went off the board. What was that one?
Yeah, that was the Clinton Foundation, and maybe Ira can go into the details. But yes, basically the Clinton Foundation raised in 2016 when she was running for president $67 million. The last year it raised $16 million. And it clearly that was a conduit for outside, especially foreign influences, to try to curry favor and to gain favor with the Clintons. And that's partly, I would argue, the way it was set up. But there were some very specific examples we have, and maybe Ira can talk about those.
And what was the company, Ira? What was the company? Tiemco? What was the company they would run it through if you wanted access to Hillary? Temco or Tiemco, like that?
Oh, I think you're thinking of Teneo.
Yeah, and Brand was involved with that, I think. Am I correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
But the example I think that we're talking about is, so Bill Clinton used to go around and give speeches, right? And so he would fly into, say, Nigeria. I think, am I right, Peter?
Yeah.
Right, and he would end up giving a speech for in excess of $500,000 for a company who was the chief of staff of the president of Nigeria. Now, here's where it gets really funky. Nigeria was, I think, number 3 on the human rights watch list of most corrupt human rights violators. And so here Bill Clinton comes in, picks up his cash, leaves, and then does a return engagement, does the same thing, gives another speech for this corrupt regime. Now, if you remember, Nigeria was also the home of Boko Haram that kidnapped all the young girls. That doesn't faze anybody, right? So they go in, they collect their due. The second time he went in there, I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on some of these facts, Peter, he was giving out checks for the best teachers in the country. And he's giving out one check after another. Clinton leaves. Meanwhile, all those checks he gave out, those bounced like a basketball. Those people didn't collect any money, but he walked in and out of that country in less time in a week spending there and collected over $1 million.
Yeah,
By the way, his wife happened to have been the Secretary of State at the time and had access to releasing discretionary funds to the country. So there was a little bit of a shenanigans going on there.
I remember another, being aware of the corruption of the government corruption. There was one case that I remember with the UBS, with the Swiss accounts overseas. And there was tens of billions of dollars of American money tucked away there, which could have been taxed and all that. And who negotiated the settlement was one Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, negotiated. And then mysteriously, Big Bill Clinton got $1.5 million for a speech over there for UBS. I mean, and then they were allowed to bring all these monies back with no fines, bring them back into the country. And what was that fella's name? I think he got $105 billion. He was the whistleblower, if you remember. Yes. That to me just stunk so much with the Secretary of State negotiate. What was her rights? You should have had the Secretary of the Treasury negotiate, not the Secretary of State. And then all of a sudden, they were able to bring all these billions of dollars without penalty, bring it back into the country. I mean, people who put their money in the bank are making 2% now. And they look at these type of things, and we pay our taxes. I mean, you get outraged. This is more political corruption. Do you remember this one?
Peter really did a really great reporting job on the Clinton Foundation. And one of the things that I remember always outraged me was that Bill Clinton had a very public office in Harlem. I think it was on
125th, yeah.
125th, maybe a block or two from Sylvia's. But in fact, his real office was across the street from Radio City Music Hall, and I'd been in it. I mean, the most expensive rent at the time in New York, the most expensive office real estate, it went on for floors and floors. And, in here they're taking in money. So he's got this Harlem office, but he's got a huge office in the middle of the most expensive. Why did the Clinton Foundation have to have offices like that? I didn't understand that.
Come on, Ira. You understand it.
I'm saying it Yeah, anyway.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
But basically, again, I hate to keep jumping all over, but that's the way I am. I have that short-minded thing because in reality, we didn't get everything out that we originally were focusing on. I want to hear more senators, more Congress people. Give me some more meat with some more names.
Well, there was one case that we highlighted on the Insider Trading that I thought was particularly interesting. He was a Alabama Republican. I'm trying to remember his name right now. Baucus, Spencer Baucus. And Spencer Baucus was the ranking a Republican on the House Finance Committee that was regulating Wall Street. And he got a briefing by the Treasury Secretary in late September 2008 about, and it was apocalyptic. And we know because Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, wrote in his memoirs that he had given this briefing to members of Congress and that Baucus was there. They were supposed to turn in their cell phones because this was so sensitive. The next morning after this apocalyptic briefing where they said the market's going to drop, 25%, Spencer Baucus went and shorted the market. He bought options betting, not really betting because he knew what was going to happen, that the market went down. He made a lot of money. 60 Minutes actually confronted Baucus, and maybe Ira can share what happened there.
Yeah, we went to his office and he played the great dodgeball game. We chased them all around. We never located him, but even the members of Congress who have a high degree of shame quotient, they felt completely. And he was stripped of his chairmanship. I think he got chased out of town ultimately, because when we did that story, what I found interesting is, some people didn't realize it was legal to do, and they felt disappointed that they couldn't get a piece of it.
But you know what? Even come a little closer, a little fresher, a little fresh meat with this Chinese pandemic. And I do call it Chinese pandemic because it certainly didn't come from Italy. The point that I have is that there were some people who were on the intelligence division, Congress people, that knew about how serious this was. And supposedly there was some stock manipulation from the intelligence gathering they had where they either sold stock, they knew the market was going to drop or what. Do we have any information on that?
Well, what we found was, when the virus was at the very, very beginning stages of it, and I wrote about this in my book, Ticking Clock, which is, and let me just read just this one line, which is, at least 4 senators dumped stock after receiving non-public briefings, as did 24 House legislatures. By the way, Burr, the one who we mentioned earlier in this thing, was one of the only 4 senators to vote against the original Stock Act. So, that gives you a sense that these, they don't learn. They saw an opportunity and they made money. And by the way, they briefed their highest donors about the coming virus and the impact it may have on the U.S. economy. So the high payers got a personal briefing, while publicly they're saying, oh, everything's going to be fine, fine, fine.
Wow. So to me, that I'm not a smart guy, but isn't that kind of inside trading?
Yeah, I mean, look, the point that we tried to make repeatedly is, if these senators, let's say, were corporate executives, they worked for a large American corporation, Apple, General Motors, doesn't matter, and they got information that, COVID was going to affect their company adversely. In this case, the senators are hearing how it's going to affect, certain sectors of the economy. And those corporate executives they dumped their own company stock in the same way. They'd go to jail.
They go to jail.
Classic insider trading.
Yeah, we do a lot of white-collar investigations, and these are some of the things that we check on to show when we go deep, do a deep dive in that. And it's the smoking gun are there, and they can't say, well, I had a feeling. I love this one. I had a feeling to get rid of that stock. But what about the phone call you had with the congressman 3 days before? Your feeling was good, but we got some time left. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about the upcoming book, if that you could speak about. Basically, what is it going to kind of focus on, Peter and Ira?
Yeah, I've got a book coming out the end of January. It's looking at corruption on the international level, and that's, I think, the interesting trend that I've seen. I don't know if Ira's seen the same thing, but corruption's become globalized. 50 years ago, you worried about some guy who was wanted a paving contract off of some infrastructure bill, who's paying a congressman money. Well, now so much of the money is global. You've got Russian, you've got especially Chinese and other entities. And so as our economy is globalized, so is our corruption. In my previous work, we talked about the Bidens, we talked about the McConnells. This book is going to look at that at a much broader level. And it's very disconcerting and it's very troubling. And the problem is, unlike the guy who wants the paving contract, that's bad, that's corrupt, that's illegal, deal with it. This not only is illegal, I would argue, it has serious national security implications, because the guy who wants the paving contract presumably still wants good things for his country. Chinese and Russian oligarchs, I would argue, don't want good things for our country, and yet politicians are lining up. One of the things just recently I discovered is that you have 20 former U.S. senators or senior members of Congress who just recently retired, who are now working. They are registered lobbyists for Chinese companies linked either to the Chinese military or to Chinese intelligence. I mean, what are you thinking? I mean, I think lobbying is a dirty business, but people have a right to petition their government. But who wants to believe that a Chinese military arms company has the right to lobby Congress? Give me a break. Well, and yet these guys are making millions of dollars a year doing this kind of stuff.
We had a former chancellor of education in New York City, Carranza, whatever the hell his name was. This is the guy who was the chancellor that was negotiating software contracts. He leaves his job and he takes a job with the software company that he made the deal with. I mean, there has to be checks and balances where you cannot do something for a certain amount of time if you leave the public office, whether it be Congress, Senate, or even city government. They have to have controls. And it just, speaking today, just makes my stomach fall out, because you realize you as an ordinary citizen have such a disadvantage. That's why people go into politics. It ain't to be Jimmy Stewart and tell the truth. It's to get into politics and make as much money as you can.
By the way, we've talked a lot about Congress, but it's just not just Congress. It's the Department of Defense. It's the Department of Justice. When I did the opiate story, there was people who was involved in enforcement efforts against drug companies who ended up leaving the Department of Justice after not prosecuting a particular drug company and then taking a job with a drug company.
Well, Congress people, right?
No, Department of Justice, high-level Department of Justice officials would literally be involved in making decisions not to go after the opiate companies, and then they ended up going to lobby for those companies.
Do we have any congressmen or senators that did the same with the opioid companies?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they ended up Orrin Hatch's, who left the Senate, but his son was a big lobbyist for the drug companies, and he was one of the biggest drug company supporters in the Senate.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that just to add to that, I mean, Bo, part of the problem is, lobbying. There are people who are legitimate lobbyists in the sense that they know the legislative process, they know how it's involved. But in the case of Orrin Hatch, his son, God bless him, he didn't know anything about lobbying. He came fresh out of college and he was hired by a bunch of companies, pharmaceutical companies and others, to lobby. Why? Because his father was a senator and the chairman of a very powerful committee. You have a senator from Missouri, a Republican named Roy Blunt. His wife is a lobbyist, and 3 of his 4 children have been registered lobbyists at one point or the other. again, I'm not saying that you don't want your kids to do well, but it's ridiculous, this idea that, the way I'm going to advance legislation is to hire this guy's kid who has no experience or no knowledge about the legislative process. How is that ultimately not some form of a payoff?
I don't, it's just the more I listen, and thank you guys, but it just gets my stomach really sick to realize that the corruption level in our government is, and no one's checking and balancing it. No one's doing anything about it. And if you try, you'll be knocked down, and I guess you won't get reelected. Very simple.
Let me give you an example that you would be, understand. Imagine if an top FBI mafia investigator went to work for the mafia right after retiring from the FBI and then became the consigliere for the head of the Gambino crime family. Now, would you think that something was wrong with that? But that's going on on a daily basis in Washington.
Well, he would have to be Italian in order to get made. Come on, we know that, Ira. Although then Junior wasn't all. He was half Jewish and half Italian. He got made, right? But, if there's, we're going to wrap it up very soon. But what else? Anything else you guys like to discuss before we wrap it up?
I think the main thing I would say, and I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but there is a lot of corruption in Washington, D.C. It's people involved in both political parties. But I would also say there are people, again, on both sides of the aisle, whether you agree with them politically or not, who are actually trying to do the right thing. We don't hear a lot from them. I would argue the way the system's structured, those people have a harder time advancing in the leadership. So oftentimes, the leadership is corrupted. There's a former member of Congress and former governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, who, when he was in Congress, he said, when you first get there, you're just thinking, oh, this is dirty. We got these fundraising lists. We got these committee assignments. He said, you stay there 3 or 4 years and what looked like a cesspool becomes a hot tub.
Wow.
It's this corrosive process. And the point is, I like term limits, but I think it makes sense because I think, the more you're in that environment, even if you're well-intentioned, it's very, very easy to get sucked in and convince yourself this is okay. And then they start to think that they deserve the personal wealth. I'm doing all this great stuff for the country. I've made this sacrifice. What's wrong with me getting a little bit of mine? So my message would be optimistic. There are some good people out there, but also you got to be willing to call out your own side. If you're only calling out the other side, we're not going to deal with this problem effectively.
What a great antidote. And Ira, you have a good antidote for us to leave with you?
One of the stories that we ended up just touching on when we did our 60-minute story was political intelligence. And there are literally people who are hired in Washington to find out which company is going to get a contract, which one's not. Then they pass that on to Wall Street. And this is literally an industry that's in Washington. We touched on it a little bit in the 60-minute story, and Peter did a much better job in his book about it. But that is something I wish somebody would sort of take a second look at, because I don't think that's changed at all.
Wow. Well, we really touched on a lot of things today. And I'd just like to go over some of the books here. Any of our listeners, we got a very good following. And Ira Rosen, The Ticking Clock, 60 Minutes. And Peter, why don't you go through the books that are available right now, Peter Schweizer, and where they could get them.
You've got Profiles in Corruption, Clinton Cash, Secret Empires. They're available at Amazon or at fine bookstores everywhere.
Yeah, and then what about our Secret Empires and our Architects of Ruin?
Yep, Secret Empires as well.
Yeah, well, all I could say, guys, I really want to thank you because this, to me, I forgot about 125 podcasts. I've had some interesting people. To me, this is one of my most interesting podcasts because it affects us all. And I think after people listen to this, they can get a little gurch in their stomach like I get, how these things are going on. When I used to look, I'll never forget when I was a kid, Joe Adabo was the congressman from South Queens. My uncle used to give him a lot of cash, and he was the head of the Defense Appropriations, and he actually wanted me to become a page boy in 1962. I told my uncle, he says, you go to Washington, he used to smoke a cigar, you go to Washington, you become a page boy, this would be good for you, meet a lot of people, a lot of connections. And I says, Uncle Joey, I don't want to go to Washington. I don't want to run around with a little hat on, and I don't want to be a page boy. And subsequently, I realized through my life, 12 years old, my uncle was dumping so much cash to Joe Adamo, but this is the way of life, and he would get things done. And that was it. So I thought that was an accepted thing. You pay a politician, and you get things done. You want to build a casino in South Queens? You pay a politician. You get things done. This is the way of life. It sucks, but guys like you, detectives like you, Peter and Ira, you're real detectives, and I want to thank you for investigating and uncovering the facts about really what's going on. What an interesting segment. And I want to thank Ira, and I want to thank you, Peter, and everybody out there. Buy these books. It brings you to the inside. It's great reading. We got a pandemic going on. Sit in your bathroom there and start reading one of these books, and it's be gravitating to you. Thank you. And thank you again, Peter and Ira. And God bless you. Happy New Year. And may God protect your family from this new one, the French Fougois COVID, whatever the hell it's called now. But be careful, everybody. And we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.